Bonus question. Did John just stir his tea with a palette knife or didn't he? Let me know what you think. Okay. Early on, especially in a vine charcoal drawing, way different than how I approach graphite. I like to establish the pattern of light and dark and then use those shapes of light and dark as a guide as I try to make adjustments and changes to the drawing. When I talk about the line drawing and getting all the players established on the field, I'm really not establishing all the players because I haven't given myself the shapes of light and dark. You remember from sighting and measuring and all of that we were trying to plot the edges when we were doing straight line construction. We were using these straight lines to try to find the edges of shadows, things like that. And you can do that, but that is a very slow process. And I think vine charcoal is a very immediate and quick response kind of material. So I want to work in a much more quick fashion. One of the keys. When I'm working with value, I usually have one eye closed and the other one is squinted way down so I can barely see out of it. That's when I'm looking at the model, and a lot of times when I'm looking at my drawing too. Reason is, it removes all the details. I can't see the details of her hair, freckles, the belly button, things like that. It reduces the information to just big blobs of light and dark, and that's all I need in the beginning. The most general idea of what the light and dark pattern is. And I'm going to blast that out really fast. The background in this photograph is black, so the darkest things I see when I squint my eyes down are the background. So real quick, I want to establish that. I'm not using the point of my charcoal, anything like that. I'm not being too careful about the lines that I drew. They're just kind of a guide to where I want this shape to exist. I'm just making this shape darker than what's next to it because that's what I see. Great, that's the biggest stuff. I do see a lot of smaller dark shapes inside the figure, and I want to get those going pretty soon too. So right here around the shoulder, there's a dark shape. And this part of the arm is darker than the other part, and so is this one. Try to notice that as I'm doing this, to an extent, I'm paying attention to the direction of my strokes. Notice up here, I was doing this direction, this angle, but then I changed this angle. I'm thinking about the planes, really. The plane here seems to go across at this angle, whereas up here it seems to go more at this angle. What I don't want you to do is try to shade along the length of something. Never quite looks right. It makes more visual sense to shade across the form. I'm working from this general idea towards the specifics. So I'm letting it be loose and kind of all over the place here early on because I have to establish really in a gestural way. I'm just trying to establish where I see separation between light and dark. The advantage that putting the shading in gives me is I've just got another layer of information to compare. All the information I need is here in the photo. And so I want to pay attention to what it's telling me. Again, don't let your brain start to tell you where shadows go because it's seen a bunch of people before. I can do the same thing. I think of this kneaded eraser as a drawing tool. It's not a corrective tool or a correcting tool necessarily. It's for creating light. So if this action creates dark, this action creates light. So I'd really like for you to think about it in those terms. Not this is what I use to make corrections. Just this is what I use to create light. I'm drawing with light now instead of dark. A lot of times you'll see me actually push back and forth on the edges of things. I'm doing here, where's the edge of the breast compared to the negative space beyond? And what I do a lot of times is I'm pushing darker into this negative space. I go right over the breast. And then I come in and I carve the light back out of it. So I'm pushing, pulling back and forth on where the edges of things are going to be. I think of this a lot as in layers, building layers. So again, I'm not trying to go as the darkest dark right away or anything like that. I'm building layers. So the more times I go over this space, the darker it's going to get. And the decision to go back into this space and make it darker is based on the changes that have happened to the things around it. This part right here, not the pubic hair, but this part of the abdomen right here is darker than the highlight on the breast up here. So as I make this darker, so by comparison to that, it works. I see that this starts to match this, which means, okay, if that's going to go darker, then this needs to go darker. And that's kind of the decision-making process that happens across there. And while I'm doing this, I'm still looking for, are there things that need to move? Things I don't trust just yet. All right, so wasn't talking there for a while. I was just drawing, letting you watch. I want to say that a big part of what I'm doing at this stage can be called glazing. What glazing is I recognize that this shape is darker than the leg. That makes sense. So I need the leg to be darker than it is right now, though. And so since I've already established that this shape is darker than this one, because it is, when I shade over this part to push this darker, I go all the way over that darker piece too. And then as long as I do this, this piece will always stay lighter than this because I'm putting the same amount of dark across the whole thing. That darker stuff still exists, so it's going to constantly be pushing that darker and darker, which is good. It's what I want. And so you'll see I'm shading more and more over the entire okay. New trick, chamois cloth. Mine's black because I never wash them, and I don't recommend that you do either, although I hear you can. What's it for? Why do we have it in our kit? A lot of times we're just gonna wipe whole drawings out with it and just make the paper a gray tone, which is beautiful and fantastic. But in process, I can even out some tones even more by using this. Now, you all may like to do this, but this imparts oil from your finger into the drawing and makes that space permanent because the oil soaks the charcoal into the paper. It's gross too, right? If we use the chamois cloth, it replaces our finger, and so I can wipe and smooth things out. Now, I don't like to do that too much because it gets rid of the marks that I've spent all my time making. But if I did want to, say, just lighten an area slightly, the eraser is going to take too much. And so I can use this, which it won't erase so much as just lift. So take a look. I don't know if you can see this in the camera shot. Right here, you can see that it gets lighter. There's some reflected light inside this shadow as the thigh bumps into the pubic area. So rather than use my eraser, which will pull too much charcoal off the page, if I just press this in here, you see how that's just lifting some of the charcoal off. And I'm getting that light tone to happen. It comes down here too. It's also softening the appearance of all the marks. Like I said, I'm a big fan of showing the marks of the artist's hand at work. But sometimes I want to create just a softer appearance to that. I can see lots of spaces here where just pulling, here I slid this and I picked up quite a bit more, but in most places I just press this in, and I can get another tone out of what's going on. If I pick up enough charcoal on this, I can draw with it. So see how this is really light, but it should never be as light as what's up here. And so with the charcoal that's already on there, I can pull that down and soften the appearance there of the belly. So I find this to be a really valuable tool in creating some of the tones that I'm after in my drawing. While I'm talking, I'll show you a little trick with the kneaded eraser. Very similar to what I was doing with the chamois cloth. I take this, whatever shape, and I go someplace it doesn't matter too much. So out here, there's a bunch of charcoal on there. And if I don't keep reshaping this, I'm just going to end up with, I know you probably can't see it very well, but there's a glaze of charcoal on here. And so I could use that somewhere, like where, to create an add. I can use a clean edge, of course, to create more light. But what I was really wanting to show you is if I get this kind of covered in charcoal, it's not going to erase anymore, but it can work to soften things. And you can be a bit more specific with this tool than you can the chamois cloth, because you can make this into little points. And so if I wanted to soften the edge of this line here without removing any material, there I have it. All right, so in the end, when I really get into this, I've got all three in my hand, and you'll just see switching back and forth. Draw a little bit, adding dark, and then erasing a little bit to create some more light. If I erase too much, I just glaze over it again, but now the shape is more correct. So I erase, it goes a little too light, but it changes the shape. And now I go back in and reestablish. Back, I had to go freshen up my tea, get some hot water going in there. One of the things that I noticed when I did that is that there's problems with the drawing. Not always, as you know, makes me pretty happy. And today it's making me happy for a couple of reasons. One, you get to see kind of the ideas behind the beauty of, there I was just touching, not rubbing, but kind of the same idea. I've found that I can just touch and lift off some of the charcoal when I want to do a really subtle change. When I take a break, and I recommend you do too, don't try and just sit down for 2 hours and draw this straight out. You get worn out, you get brain tired, and all of that kind of thing. But the really good thing about taking a break is when you come back and you look at it, you can assess a lot quicker where things are wrong and then make better adjustments. And one of the big things I noticed that was wrong was that the hips, basically the whole torso, weren't wide enough. And so how do I go about making the change? How do I adjust for that? I check my negative spaces first and foremost. Those are some of the most informative things that happen inside a drawing. And so I was checking those to make sure they were lining up the way I see them in the photograph. The next thing is checking relative widths. Does this look the right width? Does this look the right width? Is this the right width compared to this? This to this? So it's that kind of game of measuring that we've been talking about all along. And so as I was looking at it, I was thinking in those terms. I know I keep losing my train of thought because I'm drawing, but I literally think of those things while I'm drawing other parts. That's just kind of how my brain wants to work on this information for some reason. So while I'm adjusting this shape here, I'm still kind of looking over here to see what's going on and make some plans for changes. And the biggest thing I'm noticing is that I can push almost this whole side out a bit more and open up a little more space across the midsection here, open up the hips, and then things will start to feel a bit better in the drawing. by doing, no, that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that even at kind of a later stage, I don't just buy wholesale what I've done. I continue to look for places that need to change, where things need to be looked at a little closer and adjustments need to be made. And I continue to make those adjustments is the most important part. I don't care what stage I am at in the drawing. If I see that it's wrong or a piece of it is out of place, I'm going to go back in there and cite and measure and do all the things I've learned and try to see where I need to make a change to make it do more what it does. And so basically it's this game over and over again, moving around, trying to see from that big general idea of what's happening, narrowing down over and over again until we get closer to the specific idea of what's happening. Always being willing to make changes, constantly comparing what you've done to what needs to be done. And continuing on from there. So I'm just going to keep working on this. And I'll probably stop talking, but just follow along. I'll probably speed up the video because it'll take a little while. I'm just going to keep making adjustments, and then we'll talk about details as we get closer to that point. But this kind of push and pull, ebb and flow is the thing that we want at this stage. We want to keep that going for quite a while. Constantly comparing light, dark, just the same way we've been comparing widths and lengths, thicknesses, things like that.